BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
You're listening to Artworks, imaginative documentaries about culture and the arts from BBC Radio 4. Available only on BBC Sounds.
Depeche Mode, the king of the world!
Today, the city of Los Angeles officially declared Depeche Mode Day in LA.
We played with them in Spain, Portugal, Germany, and France. And the roar from the crowd, the loudest thing I have ever heard.
Depeche Mode are unique. They are one of the first British bands to score on the pop charts as a synth band, and they also became rock stars of the old variety, glamorous, sexy, and dark. They're one of the most successful groups in history, having sold over 100 million records. That's more than Oasis, the Spice Girls, or the Police. Their numbers are closer to artists like Coldplay, David Bowie, and Adele. In Berlin, Mexico City, Warsaw, Los Angeles, Moscow, they're gods. Depeche Mode means something to people, in a way that seems to go beyond the songs. I assume that was the case in their home, in England, where they grew up and started their careers. They are popular, but there is something slightly off, a family feud that seems to go back to the beginning.
Have you ever felt that you weren't taken seriously enough by the British media or radio?
There's always been the odd comment that really hasn't been particularly relevant to the music, and then that's sometimes a bit irritating, you know.
I've heard them say that Britain is their least favourable market around the world.
Historically, they've been mocked.
It seems to me insane that they wouldn't give them a lifetime achievement at the Brits. Who the hell are you going to give it to?
I'm Sasha Frere-Jones. I'm a writer, a musician, and a music critic. And I want to find out why, while Depeche Mode connects at such a deep level with such a massive global audience, they have been looked down upon in their home country. Is it something to do with British cultural tastes? Is it all that talk about sex and bondage and sin in the lyrics? Is it all the synthesizers? Or is it something about class or how cultural gatekeepers decide what is and isn't authentic? Or is it just an old-fashioned family resentment where the home crowd still wishes they were dancing to all the happy songs from the first album? This is Depeche Mode, Reach Out and Touch Faith. They are a band born from the grey suburbs of Essex, Basildon, 1980. 4 working-class teenagers with cheap synthesizers, hair gel, and big ideas. Lead songwriter Vince Clarke, baritone singer Dave Gahan, and synth players Martin Gore and Andrew Fletcher.
I think actually the fact they come from Basildon matters.
Alexis Petridis, a music critic and writer for The Guardian.
Basildon has certain resonances. It's this kind of new town. It's uncool. It is the absolute heartlands of that sort of Thatcherite Essex man.
I always imagine that Basildon is this great place. You know, when they come home, there's big parties and parades.
It begins with us asking people around the world, what do you think Basildon's like?
Jeremy Deller is an artist and co-director of the film My Hobby is Depeche Mode, along with Nick Abrahams.
And of course they think it's just rolling hills and castles and people playing cricket and this idyllic little village where these young men created this incredible movement almost.
Small houses.
Beautiful houses like the castles.
And we know it not to be like that.
The worst word you could always hear was oi mate. If you ever heard them two immortal words, oh no. If Dave was to walk or Martin was to walk through the town now, a lot of people wouldn't even recognise them, which might shock a lot of people. But even to this very day, they're not within their own town seen as huge stars.
It might seem strange now, but in the late 70s and early 80s, electronic music was still a new frontier, unfamiliar, futuristic, and not yet part of the pop mainstream. A few electronic records had started creeping into the charts, most notably Gary Numan's Cars, but for the most part, electronic music still felt like a curiosity.
Here's the new single from Depeche Mode, Just Can't Get Enough, over here.
Before the stadium-filling darkness and pioneering electronic experimentation, Depeche Mode were introduced to a broad UK audience in 1981 with their third single, Just Can't Get Enough. Today it's a synth-pop classic. Back then, it was seen as a bit naff. On that first Top of the Pops appearance, they don't look like your typical pop stars. They look like children borrowing their dad's clothes. Dave Gahan wore a white suit jacket, black trousers hitched up to somewhere around his ribcage, and a bow tie. But the sound was already finding an audience.
I mean, those days people watched bands on stage, right? That was the thing. You went to a gig, you saw a band on the stage, and you watched them.
I spoke to Daniel Miller, the man who signed the band to his label Mute.
Kids, and there were kids who were going to their shows, were just dancing, like as though it was a club. And that was something I hadn't really seen before. And so there was this special kind of relationship that was starting to grow between the audience and the band.
And despite decent sales and a growing fan base, there was already a backlash from critics.
As soon as you start having success, people try and put you down, which is a typically British thing. There were certain journalists in the media who were very supportive. As they became more successful, they made up all sorts of stories about how I'd put them together as a band, like some kind of Svengali, which was completely false. And the critics started to put the boot in.
Critics had a lot of power. They could make or break a band, and many were still caught up in the idea that rock music sat at the top of the cultural hierarchy. Music critic Alexis Petridis.
The initial long-standing music press is pretty sniffy towards this new wave of pop music. It's not kind of serious. Bands like Queen would put no synthesizers used on this record. What that proved, I've absolutely no idea.
And it wasn't only the critics.
I remember the Musicians' Union in Britain at one point tried to ban me. They said that I was...
What?
Yeah.
Synth-pop pioneer and massive Depeche Mode fan, Gary Newman.
So this is my own union trying to ban me, saying that I was putting, and I quote, putting real musicians out of work. Really? Wouldn't agree with it, but I could understand it if my music sounded like it had real musicians on it and I've synthesized them, but it doesn't. There was comments about how, we don't write our own songs, the machines write the songs. As if the technology back then was capable of doing anything. It might be true now with AI.
The music press changes its tune around sort of 1982.
Synth-led pop exploded, but just as Depeche Mode finally had some cultural clout, Vince Clarke, their teenage hitmaker, packed his bags. I don't know what you guys put in the water in Basildon, but first he joined up with fellow schoolmate Alison Moyet to start Yazoo. And then Clarke went on to form another band. You may have heard of them as well, Erasure. Losing your lead songwriter and bandleader would mark the death of most bands, but the shy, reserved Martin Gore took over as lead songwriter. This is where it really begins. The Depeche Mode that millions of people fell in love with. The band shifted from pop singles to something darker, stranger, more ambitious. Alexis Petridis.
When Depeche Mode changed their approach pretty dramatically on their 1983 album Construction Time Again, they changed their image, a lot of leather, fetishistic, androgynous to a certain degree. They changed their sound. They become very influenced by a German experimental band called Einstürzende Neubauten. And Einstürzende Neubauten used to make music banging metal together and things like that. They famously played a gig at the ICA in London where they brought a power drill on stage and attempted to drill through the floor of the venue. So it ends in a riot.
Synth superstar Gary Newman.
It sounds back to front, but this is what electronic music is supposed to be. It's meant to be experimental. Even though what they're doing wasn't really electronic, it was hitting bits of metal. But it had that experimental, what else can we do with sound, with noises to make it musical? But I hadn't seen it taken to that next level until Depeche Mode.
Groups aligned, I was standalone. It's like, following a football team. I've never really followed a football team like I've followed Depeche Mode, around the world.
Depeche Mode were becoming something of a cult proposition. They may not have been topping the charts, but the people discovering them were obsessed. This wasn't the band your other schoolmates were into. They didn't slot into any tidy subculture. For the right kind of teenager, though, that was everything.
It blew me away. It was kind of like a revelation that this lot were for me.
One of those fans in the UK was Paul Gidley, who first heard the band when he was 14. He's now seen them live more than 50 times.
The electronic, leather, dark, somber, meaningful music that just resonated with a kid trying to find his way in, discovering yourself, and I've gone with it ever since. I mean, you talk about going on a journey. I've been on that journey for 40 years.
I think it really appealed to outsiders, the people who weren't the coolest kids, who felt like they weren't part of a mainstream musical genre.
What do Depeche Mode mean to me? You could sound quite tragic in the answer here, but they mean everything. They've been with me all my adult life and my formative years. I kind of was the brand guardian, and I would build and still do cases for the defence almost. Even with my group of friends now who are, all in our 50s or whatever, I still find myself defending them because they have this legacy from when the lads remember them from day one, when they were Just Can't Get Enough.
But I think the critical perception at that point is it's a pop band that are now trying a bit too hard not to be a pop band.
And if you look at their album, the singles 81 to 85, on the inside sleeve notes for each track, we put a good review and a bad review.
Oh, wow.
We thought it was funny, annoying, but kind of funny.
Depeche Mode were pushing their sound into darker, more industrial, more experimental territory. Their 1984 album, Some Great Reward, took it even further. One of its biggest hits? A song that referenced politics, bondage, and submission. Not exactly standard chart fare. Then came Black Celebration in 1986. Moody, atmospheric, and defiantly unradio friendly. It didn't sound like anything else in the charts. The reputation of the band as a bubblegum pop outfit couldn't be shaken, but in Europe, that didn't matter. In West Germany, France, Italy, and Sweden, Depeche Mode arrived with no baggage. Singles like People Are People hit #1 in Germany, while gigs jumped from 5,000 to 15,000 seats in a single tour. East of the Iron Curtain, the story was even wilder. Even though the Cold War was ongoing and Western records were banned, Depeche Mode cassettes somehow slipped through, from Russia to Poland, Hungary, and East Germany.
They help us to live. They help us to survive, to stay ourselves. They are more than just a band for us.
I am very glad that I have my friends, that I found my friends, and Depeche Mode helped me to find them.
We knew there was a story in Eastern Europe and Russia that would be very interesting. It was a sort of mythical stories about the band's popularity.
For the 2006 film, My Hobby is Depeche Mode, Jeremy Deller and Nick Abrahams traveled across the world and spoke to Depeche Mode fans.
Depeche were really big during the Cold War, when they weren't actually selling records, but bootlegs were travelling across Russia and Eastern Europe. For some reason, their sound connected with young people, that sort of melancholic, futuristic sound. There's a similarity with what the Beatles did in America and Britain in 63, 64.
The Beatles arrived in America in the early 60s and ushered in a wave of optimism with youthful pop music. This was just after the assassination of JFK, and they represented something new. Depeche Mode came to represent the same in Eastern Europe in the 1980s. Their music slipped across borders, passed hand to hand, becoming a soundtrack for private rebellion.
My theory is that because those records are so well produced, and then you could copy it again, and you still hear the song well, it wouldn't get muddy like rock music might. It would still have that clarity.
The most subversive and thrilling example of this is the brilliantly named Dave Day in Russia, named after lead singer Dave Gahan.
Dave, happy birthday! Happy birthday! Our congratulations from Russia, from St. Petersburg.
Dave's birthday, which also is Victory Day in Russia, young people would gather in Mayakovsky Square in their thousands, all dressed like the band, would talk about the band with each other, exchange information. It's just after the war had fallen. Very chaotic time in Russia. And that still happens in Russia that day.
In Russia, Romania, Hungary, Poland, Ukraine, and the Baltics, the band became a cultural phenomenon. After the rules relaxed, they played massive stadium shows in Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and one show in East Berlin where people flocked just to be near the venue. This is an audience the band wouldn't have necessarily been aware of at the time, but they are now.
But also there's Depeche parties all the time going on in Eastern Bloc countries. I mean, there's a bar in Estonia that just plays Depeche Mode. Still, they have a longevity, a very loyal fan base, which has gone through generations as well, which is quite unusual.
Not that any of this impressed the British. European music wasn't considered, and here's that word again, cool in the UK.
Well, some of the snobbery that British critics and maybe British audiences feel towards European music comes from partly from Eurovision and partly from the fact that for a long time the vast majority of music from continental Europe that made the British charts were things that people heard in discos on holiday and brought back. You have that sort of phenomenon of these summer hits, and they're pretty naff, but that leads people to think that's all there is going on in Europe.
Is cultural superiority an illusion that British people suffer from? I don't know, but I'll let Alexis talk about it.
I think there is a sense that, maybe more historically than now, that we kind of get it right in Britain when it comes to pop music. We know what we're doing. We gave the world the Beatles. We gave the world David Bowie. You know, Depeche Mode got big in Eastern Europe, which is kind of an unknown quantity. You know, there's very little because of the Cold War and because of the Iron Curtain and so on and so forth. Very little pop culture emerges from those countries that people even know about. And so, you know, there is this assumption that what people like over there is going to be some sort of dreadful Soviet simulacrum of naff pop music or naff rock music or whatever. So being huge in Russia or Hungary or something like that, yeah, you could see why people might go, oh, so what? I mean, joke's on you, mate, because like Russia is a pretty big market, you know?
So what is it about Depeche Mode's music that connects so deeply with those territories?
Well, I think there's a lot of longing with that sound. It's maybe about not getting what you want, potentially, or waiting for something. Of course, if you're stuck in a communist country, you are thinking about what's going on elsewhere. Also, you're longing for a day when you might have some kind of freedom. It's also a very teen thing, isn't it? To be longing for something or for someone or for change or for the world to change around you. And it's just heightened if you're living in a society that you want to change as well. So these things combined, your sort of emotional life and your political and social life become one.
While making the film, Jeremy Deller found fans beyond Eastern Europe, in countries such as Brazil, Mexico, and Iran.
It was the era of the revolution, right after the revolution, which the government was trying to control everything and trying to push the Islamic outlook and view to people, and teenagers who were following bands like Depeche Mode at that time was really forbidden. And people like us, we used to get caught and beaten by police. What you look like and what you listen to is basically setting up who you are. And when you don't fit in a society, eventually you feel separated from them. I went to my first Depeche Mode concert after 20-something years. It was definitely the best night of my life.
Well, I think other bands have it, but not many. And you're lucky to get it as a band. That sort of devotional aspect. When you use the devotion, it's quite a good way of looking at it. It's a sort of semi-religious, I would say, or spiritual connection to the band.
While all this was happening in Europe, Depeche Mode quietly cracked America. So you had these very different, politically and socially opposed societies getting a lot out of the band and having one massive thing in common, which was Depeche Mode, despite the Cold War. But again, it wasn't through these traditional gatekeepers that they found their audience. As someone who spent his life around electronic music, I can tell you, Depeche Mode are revered by techno producers, house DJs, and hip-hop heads. They were played on stations that wouldn't touch guitar bands. Their songs sat comfortably next to music like Prince and early rap. In Los Angeles, something else happened. The band was embraced by not just the cool hipster kids, but the Latino community, in a deep and spiritual way. Depeche Mode's music is more than a little influenced by Catholicism, the suffering, the sin, and maybe that's why some Brits are allergic to them. They are openly emotional.
Well, what's behind me right now is probably every teenager in town, and they're all screaming in my ear. The group Depeche Mode is very hot. They started
in LA in 1990. Things got a little out of hand. All these different groups converged.
There had also been riots in LA around record signing. You know, police were called in. There were people trying to break into the shop to get their autographs. There were helicopters flying. It was a proper riot.
We've just gotten an updated figure on the number of kids here. Police say now there's maybe 15,000 kids here. A police helicopter's going...
The long love affair between LA and Depeche Mode is intense, and in 2023, it was made official.
Today, the city of Los Angeles officially declared Depeche Mode Day in LA. Are there any Depeche Mode fans in the house?
And it was here that they were finally able to shake off some of those criticisms back home. They played their first massive stadium, their biggest show to date, at the Pasadena Rose Bowl to over 60,000 people.
D.A. Pennebaker made a documentary about that period in Depeche Mode and ending up with the Pasadena Rose Bowl.
Right.
And we clipped that clip and gave it to the news in the UK. That changed the perception a lot, just that little 30-second clip. People go, they were huge in America, this kind of thing. But I think that changed people's perception of the band, because it put them in the same league, I guess, as some of the big American rock bands.
In 1990, the band released their most celebrated album, Violator. The record was a melding of experimental music and all the different threads that the band had always pulled on, giving them two of their biggest songs, Personal Jesus and, of course, Enjoy the Silence, which rides on an incredibly beautiful guitar part. The band had managed to become some of the things their detractors had always wanted, but on their own terms and in their own time. It took America, stadiums full of Americans, screaming for a British band with eyeliner and synths, for the British to finally take them seriously. There's something revealing about that, about who gets to be taken seriously in Britain. America is considered cool, and it made the UK take notice. Eastern Europe, not so much. For the band members, this must have been gratifying. Dave Gahan and Martin Gore don't live in the UK. They've lived in the US for many years now. Synth player Andrew Fletcher remained in the UK until his untimely death in 2022. But before he died, something magical happened.
Just Can't Get Enough was adopted by football fans as a chant.
Really?
And you got like 40 or 50,000 people chanting Just Can't Get Enough.
No.
It was very sweet because the late Andy Fletcher, we were both big Chelsea fans.
Yeah.
And I remember when it was a very moving moment when the whole stadium was singing Just Can't Get Enough. And Fletcher was sitting there, taking it in.
Oh.
That was a lovely moment, actually, very moving for me.
In the UK, though, Depeche Mode are still not as big as they are everywhere else in the world. But in a reverse to many artists, each tour the band do, they play to bigger, younger, and more devoted audiences. Musician Susie Stapleton has supported the band across Europe to some of their biggest crowds. She saw them play Twickenham Stadium in 2023 to 65,000 people.
And there certainly seemed like the same level of excitement there. It was quite hot, it was June, so people were kind of struggling with the heat. And this guy got pulled out of the crowd on a stretcher, and he looked like he was out cold. I was quite concerned about him, and security carried him past me, and it was during Stripped, and I see his mouth moving, going, stripped down to the bone. I was like, oh, he's going to be okay.
Those devoted British fans have been spreading the good word for up to 40 years. Our mega fan Paul Gidley was also there.
From the outside, it might look a little bit bizarre. Such a complex relationship. I will listen to them tonight, I will listen to tomorrow. This is me. They've had a huge influence on who I am, how I've turned out, I guess. Been a brand advocate, I've been a brand guardian, and I've introduced other friends, my wife, and now, both my girls are now, have been with me. Yeah, that means quite a lot.
So that's it. Everything is fine and dandy in the Depeche Mode world, right? You guys have finally accepted them as the world-conquering band they've always been. In 2013, they were offered a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Brits, but with one caveat. Mute boss Daniel Miller.
For years, all their contemporaries have been nominated for Lifetime Achievement Awards, right? And they hadn't been. I think there was a huge amount of pressure to have them given that award. So eventually, Depeche Mode were nominated. And the tradition with the Brits is that they play out the show. And that's broadcast on TV. And the TV company said, well, that's okay. They can play to the audience in the hall, but they won't be broadcast. Because our audience, we have a family audience, and they think they're too weird.
They weren't allowed to perform on television despite every other recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award in history being able to. The band obviously declined this rather bizarre offer, and they publicly responded by saying, well, what they said I couldn't possibly repeat on Radio 4.
I thought we'd all agreed, you see, that Depeche Mode are just brilliant. Maybe the people on the Brits would be in the toilet when that vote took place or something, I don't know. I really don't know what else Depeche Mode would have to do.
The truth is, Depeche Mode don't need Britain. They are one of the biggest selling artists of all time. They don't need Brit Awards or accolades from a country that has struggled with them occasionally. And maybe the question itself doesn't matter anymore, because the way that people, especially younger listeners, discover and consume music has changed, and they found Depeche Mode. Their last world tour was the biggest in the band's career. We're now in a hyper-connected world, and there's brilliant, exciting pop culture coming from everywhere. And much of it has been influenced by this one strange band. Billie Eilish, Trent Reznor, and Chris Martin have all name-checked the band as an influence. We're not getting recommendations from magazines or tastemakers or even radio anymore. We're getting it from playlists, YouTube algorithms, TikTok edits, and word of mouth from across the world, from fathers introducing their kids to the band.
The music press sort of barely exists now, and it doesn't have that kind of power, and it doesn't have the kind of mass audience that it once did. What streaming has done is completely decontextualize music, because there's a new audience that's come along and doesn't really care about whether something was deemed cool. It's just the music. If critical opinion mattered for anything, Ed Sheeran would still be busking, because as far as I can see, Ed Sheeran has never had a particularly good review in his life, and he's probably the most successful male solo artist of the 21st century. So, you know, I don't think it really matters a fig what I think or any critic thinks anymore. If it ever did it ever really matter that much? We're talking about this perception of Depeche Mode as being uncool. It's not like it adversely affected their career, you know. It's just interesting because they're perceived in such a different way in other countries.
We're being given culture without context, and maybe that's a good thing. Without the need for cultural approval, what's left is just the music. And on those terms, Depeche Mode were always going to win. At their best, Depeche Mode songs sound like holy music for the godless. They're about yearning, spiritual, sexual, existential, in the language of machines, the universal ache that does not need translation. This was a Pomona audio production for BBC Radio 4. It was produced by Richard Power and presented by me, Sasha Frere-Jones.
A huge thank you for the use of the clips from Our Hobby is Depeche Mode, which was produced by Jackie Edenbrow.
Enjoy the silence.